All right, let's get started. Hey there. Welcome to the US Web Design System, our monthly call for October of 2020. My name is Dan Williams, and I'm the USWDS product lead. And I have my audio on, and I have my presentation going. And that's all great, and thanks for being here. We've got a few announcements and a couple things to share and a great special guest to get today and a great topic to talk about later. So first, I'd like to mention that we're recording this monthly call. And as always, we post these recordings to YouTube. So turn off your video. If you don't want even the slightest chance of your face appearing on camera, I think we strip all that out anyway, but you know, why risk it? And we'll be posting links and references into the chat as we go along. And you're encouraged to ask questions in the chat at any time. If any member of our team can answer your question in the chat, we'll do so. Otherwise, there'll be some time for question and answer at the end of the hour. Also, be sure to introduce yourself in the chat. It's nice to know who's here. Your name, maybe where you're coming from, what organization you're with. And also look for a captioning link in the chat. If you're looking for closed captioning, you can find that with a link in the chat. And with that, let's get started. All right, been a good month, a busy month, and today we'll take a look at what we've done, what we've got coming up, and some other great stuff. So, you know, first off, we've got site launches. You know, it's I made it plural here, but I've actually only got one. It's a good one though. It's good and relevant, so we'll look at that site launch. And then give an update on the USWDS 2.10 beta, sort of what we've learned so far and what's coming up. And then I'd like to introduce some proposed changes to our theme color guidance, explain some existing issues with theme colors, talk about what we're trying to do to address them and what this might mean for your project. And then for the bulk of today's call, we're going to hear from our special guest, Ron Bronson, who will introduce the concept of design consequences. And these are the flip side of the user-friendly design decisions we work to promote and integrate into our sites. You know, things like deceptive design patterns or dark patterns. And we'll look a little about like what teams can do to guard against introducing hostile interactions into their sites and services. I'll have some questions for Ron. I'll have a little time to talk about that, and then there should be some time for some open questions from you all at the end. So let's get going and jump right into it with site launches. Site launch. We've got one site launch, only one, but it's a good one. It is sigpr.gov. The Special Inspector General for Pandemic Recovery. Important site, new design system site, and it's good to see it here. I should call out that if you are interested in getting a site of yours sort of promoted and displayed in the call like this, give a shout out in the public Slack, and we'll include it in the monthly roundup. It's feast or famine sometimes, and this is a very healthy famine of one. It's a great work. You know, I like to see new sites every month, and this is no exception. So now I want to talk a little bit about the Design System 2.10 beta, which began last month and will sort of continue through October, probably into the beginning of November. This beta has 4 sort of main features for evaluation. A new component library, integration of the SAS module system, single file settings, and guidelines for theme colors. In the last few weeks, we've released an alpha 0 and a beta 0 of this new work. Each of these is available to add to a project via NPM, just as you would with a conventional release. Next week, we'll release the next beta, 2.10 beta 1, and there'll probably be 2 more before we're ready for the final release of USWDS 2.10. So this beta 1 release that's upcoming will include the new component library and the SAS modules work. But for now, I want to focus on just the SAS modules piece. So not to get too deep into technical stuff, but the SAS module system is an update to a few of the fundamental rules about how SAS files are connected and related to each other. Currently, we use something called @import rules to link together our code base, to pull lots of different code files into one common entry point. But sort of a few months ago, actually not a few months ago, in fact, 1 year ago, SAS made a big change, announced a big change, and has sort of slated these @import rules for deprecation in 2021, currently slated for deprecation in October of 2021, in favor of what's called the module system, which, among other things, has sort of a new syntax for collecting and linking files. This SAS module system uses a couple new rules, forward and use. Whatever it's called, it's not super important to talk about it right here. There's definitely more going on under the hood than this. And there are some real benefits for code modularity and subsetting. I think that there's a lot of good in this work and a lot that will apply to the design system and really help make the design system better. And this new syntax has been around for almost exactly a year. As I mentioned, it launched in October of 2019. And it's clearly where SAS as a project is heading. They've dedicated a lot of effort into improving their sort of canonical code base, which is called Dart SAS. And they've been going on this for about a year, and as I said, have sort of slated sort of the old style to be deprecated in about a year from now. But what we're learning is that support for the SAS module system is pretty patchy. Folks need to use SAS and compile SAS in all kinds of environments using tools derived from the primary SAS code base, Dart SAS. But these tools, these sort of secondary tools, the ecosystem of these secondary tools is not really keeping up with the canonical Dart SAS core. And in the last few months, many of the primary SAS compile tools have been tagged for deprecation. These are things you may or may not be familiar with. These are tools like Node SAS, libsas, and SAS-C. These are in addition to Ruby SAS, which was deprecated kind of a long time ago. A lot of these kind of sort of second or third party implementations of SAS are beginning to fall considerably out of sync with the core SAS and are in fact now starting to be tagged for deprecation. And this means that software that builds SAS into its product is also likely sort of out of date and out of sync with the core. One of our most common build systems is Jekyll, and built-in Jekyll SAS can't parse SAS module system at all. So this is a serious concern. And while we want to avoid delivering a code base that's out of step with sort of modern norms, like we're also not going to make any change without confirming that it's a practical upgrade for teams and really worth the effort. I think today that this means that the SAS module work looks kind of possibly unlikely in the near future. There's enough that's really sort of up in the air and not really fully baked yet that makes, I think it makes us a little concerned about how well we can actively, practically implement this across the entire design system user base. But if we don't implement SAS modules now, we're going to be reevaluating this work at a later date. At some point, the ecosystem will catch up. At some point, I think the heat will turn up, and that we're going to see SAS modules be implemented in all the places where we need them to be. And when that happens, the design system will be there to sort of turn that functionality on. But for now, it looks like the SAS modules work maybe on hold. What we will try to do is to sort of use a different kind of technique to allow better code subsetting until we can actually use SAS modules. So more to come on that, but that is a good thing that we have learned by doing this. And all this is something of a roundabout way of saying that your feedback matters. We want to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. So try out these beta releases, like look for problems, let us know how they can improve. We're definitely not afraid to shelve things or make changes if something just isn't working. So now to something in which I have a little bit more confidence. These are the guidelines for theme colors. As I mentioned last month, we're working to make some changes to how we use theme colors. So I'll just get into why we're considering this and what we're proposing to change. So one of the key features of the USWDS color system is its grading rubric. So we break color families into grades of relative luminance or lightness from 0, which is pure white, all the way up to 100, which is pure black. These tend to move in steps of 10. So each color family has whatever it is, 9, 10, counting, somewhere a common number of color steps in every color family. And these grades are meaningful for calculating the contrast ratio between two colors. Most importantly, if two colors have a difference in grade, or what we've called a magic number of 50 or more, this satisfies WCAG and Section 508 AA contrast. And this is the target for most color pairings on any screen. Similarly, a magic number of 40 would satisfy AA large contrast, and a magic number of 70 would satisfy AAA contrast. But there aren't really any equivalent rules when it comes to theme colors. System color tokens use grades, but theme tokens use a relative t-shirt sizing rubric that gets darker and lighter from a root value. And that's as far as our guidance really goes at this point. Teams are free to implement theme colors as they choose, as long as the darker colors are darker and the lighter colors are lighter. Teams can assign these any system tokens that work. And the way theme tokens work is that each theme token gets an assignment from a system token. So the primary lighter color will get a system token like indigo 20. Primary light would get something like indigo 30. Primary would get something like indigo 40. And currently also, you don't have to use all of them. So you might not have a lightest or a darkest. Those could be set to false. You're really free to do it however you like. And while this is really flexible, it's not very reliable when it comes to accessibility. For instance, in this example, the darker and the light values happen to have a magic number of 50, and they would be an appropriate color pairing. They would achieve AA color contrast. But if we go back to the initial setup, the way we'd had it, and we make a little change, if we do something like we change the value from 30 and 40 for light and root to 40 and 50, if we make this kind of a change, this is still correct, given in the current schema. They're still correct relative to one another, but this will adversely affect accessible contrast. If we look at the same pairing of light and darker, this is a magic number of 40. It only satisfies AA large and not the AA target that we're typically looking for. And if a team decided to, add a false value to darker, which is acceptable, then that would result in a compile error. And in fact, we've seen both of these situations happen again and again, both internally and in your projects as well. So there's some issues with theme colors, particularly around accessibility and sometimes around reliability of compiling. We know that theme colors are important. They're really the key to simple color theming, but they can be unreliable and they can introduce sometimes inscrutable errors and unintentional accessibility mistakes into a site. So what we're proposing is something more like this. Yep, let's go more like this. And so this is the proposed USWDS theme color guidance. And the idea is that for each theme color step, that we want to limit the options to only certain system color grades, and also requiring that each grade be present in a project. So, white and black, of course, they don't change, but the lightest grade, you choose between something like 5 or 10. The lighter grade, you might choose between 10 and 20. Light grade, choose between 30 and 40. The root grade, we'd always have at 50. Dark grade would always be at 60. Darker grade could be a 70 or 80, and the darkest grade would be a 90. So there's still a little bit of flexibility in the overall sort of tone of how you want your colors to look in your theme, but there's a little bit more rigor around just which system grades would apply to each of the theme grades. And with this, teams would always know that a certain theme color combination would work. Like lighter and darker would always be at least AA contrast. And the code that we ship would be written to work regardless of what color families you assign to your theme. So if you had something like a white background would always work with the root color, with darker, darkest, and black. And so the lightest background would always work with darker, darkest, and black. Lighter against these, and so on. As you move through different combinations, there are always certain pairs that will always work. Root will always work against white and black. Dark will always work against white and lightest, and so on, and so forth, through all the various backgrounds. So, and this is sort of another way of looking at how pairings would work in the new theme color system. So there's sort of there's definitely a prescribed relationship that any two theme colors would have, and that would always work in the same way that we understand that sort of magic number pairings would always work as well. So what would we change? What would the design system change? We'd be changing our theme settings defaults, and we'd be changing a little bit about how our functions worked, so that certain token functions would be looking for certain system tokens, and we change any styles that reference theme colors to make sure that they're referencing the theme color of the proper grade. What would have to change sort of from the project side? What would you have to change? You need to look at your existing theme color settings, and you would want to upgrade them to the guidance. So it might mean changing something that's currently dark to darker, or moving things around a little bit so that they fit in the right categories. And then potentially adjusting any custom styles that use these theme colors so that they're pointing at the colors that you expect. What would we gain by this? We'd gain some more reliable theme output. We gain better accessibility. We gain clear guidance around theme colors as well. So moving forward, there's a lot that the design system can do to make sure that we're always delivering components and themes and core code that is accessible, and there's more confidence that projects can have, that as we roll out new components and as we roll out new features, that it's not we're not going to introduce a new component that's going to introduce a compile error or something something that would introduce a new unexpected accessibility error either. You'd be sort of go through a little bit of one-time modification, and then we would be good for the rest of conceivable time or so. But anyhow, look for this theme color change in beta 1. We're going to begin to implement this in the next beta. So if you're looking at it, you can see how that might affect your project and what kinds of changes you might have to make to upgrade to this new rubric. Then follow up with us. Did this work? Was it annoying? Like, how painful? How much of a change? Like, we know some of the benefits that we could see by it, but what we want to understand are what is the hassle? What is the pain that it might cause a project? So that's what we're looking for from you during this beta period. And that one will be coming out next week. That beta 1 should be coming out next week. So, also coming very soon, finally, some updated design assets. This will include the step indicator component, and it will also feature sort of the new sketch color variables that were just released in the last version of Sketch. And this is a new Sketch feature that kind of allows designers to more easily assign design system colors to any object and to keep those colors synced over time. So now, like, finally, really, you can add a design system color to text or to an object stroke a little bit more easily than some of the workarounds that we've developed to do that. I know. I've been waiting for color variables in something like Sketch for a long time, and I'm excited to get this out. So that'll come out along with Step Indicator in the design assets that are coming very, very soon. And that is all that I have around updates to what we're doing with the design system, what we've released, and what we will be releasing in the beta over the coming weeks. And now we're going to talk a little bit about design consequences. And this is, as I said before, this is kind of like the ugly underbelly of the user-friendly design decisions we work to promote and integrate into our sites. The good stuff. This is the flip side. You know, things like deceptive design patterns or dark patterns. Along with attention theft, coercive friction, and other kinds of intentional and unintentional work that results in a user hostile interaction. So what are these problems, and what can teams do to guard against introducing them into their sites and services? So, to address this issue, these issues, and a bit more, I want to introduce Ron Bronson, who is a design manager at 18F, and he's my colleague here in Portland, Oregon. So, Ron, I'm going to stop my share, and you can take it away.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Dan. Cool. Let me get my screen up. There it is. Great. And cool. Super. You can see that, yeah? Cool. Well, hello, I'm Ron Bronson. I'm a product design manager at 18F, and today we'll talk a little bit about hostile design, dark patterns, sort of been phrasing all these sort of challenges, things into a sort of discipline thought process called consequence design, which I'll get into a little bit. So I'm Ron Bronson. You can learn more about me on the internet. I've spent some time on the internet and talking about this topic. not just here, but in other places all over the country at conferences and so forth, discussing sort of the intersection where interaction design, or sort of these design patterny things, also meet service design, and more broadly sort of policy, where sort of all these things meet to sort of create these kinds of problems. I'm not going to get deep into that today, but to just try to give you more of a high level understanding of, what are some of these things, and more importantly, how are they connected to things that may be happening off the web, and how do we deal with them? How do we mitigate these problems? How do we find solutions to these issues earlier rather than later? And when we find them, how do we make sure that we keep them out of things we build, especially for the public? So the premise of this whole talk really is around this idea that every problem is a design problem. And when we talk about design problems, we're talking about things that you don't think of being designed as actually being designed. When you're in a long line someplace, that service, that experience was designed as a particular kind of way. And if you think about all the touch points that go into that experience, if you think about that on your phone, even, like logging into a banking app or something, every aspect of that experience, the friction involved, the ease of use of your ability to do that, the ease of you being able to talk to someone if something goes wrong, all those touch points are designed. And when you frame problems in this particular paradigm, when you're able to do this, it gives you an ability to start trying to figure out, well, maybe we didn't intend for this to happen this particular way. And so I like to frame every conversation like this way. That being said, there's a sort of a punchline to this whole point. The genesis of this talk actually had nothing to do with terrible pop-ups on the internet, although there are lots of those, and many are not included in this deck, but you've seen them before. It actually came from being in a real life experience. If you live in DC, you know what this looks like, because it still looks this way, as horrifying as it is looking at sort of the kiosk for buying a Metro Pass. In Washington, DC is the example, but I was in Chicago when this happened. It was a similar kind of thing. And I was waiting for a train. There were a lot of folks waiting to buy tickets for this train. I had bought my ticket already and I had a few hours to kill. So I just watched people use the particular kiosk. It wasn't this one, but a similar deal. And that kiosk had a voice. So I watched people use this thing with a voice, shouting at them, telling them how to do the thing, to the point where they would have they would know how to do it. Old people, young people, didn't make a difference. It was agnostic to the person. Everyone had a problem using this thing. And I just watched this happen, probably for several hours. They'd have folks who worked there come help them, and it was the same problem. And I thought, who made this? Who designed this interface? Why are these things set up this way? And this is 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago that this was the case. And it got me on a wormhole thinking about, first of all, auditing sort of these kiosks, but also thinking about how other kinds of design, supermarket checkout lanes, the kinds of benign things that you don't think about, they're part of your life every day, but you don't think about as being designed experiences, and how these sort of experiences are put in our lives, often hostile experiences that didn't have to be that way. Why is that the case, and what can we do? And more importantly, instead of just abdicating responsibility and saying, oh, well, we didn't mean for that to happen, or it wasn't our fault, trying to figure out how those kinds of things permeate the tools we also build. So that's where this all came from. But more importantly, let's talk straightly about hostile design. I try to not use the term dark patterns often. I know people know what it means, and so I'm going to use it interchangeably, but I try not to use the term explicitly, because it just implies something that I don't really want to imply. But this particular consequence, hostile design, dark patterns, are user interface tricks that are crafted to deceive users into doing things that they might not otherwise do. Maybe you've gotten a call from a parent or an older person in your life who tells you, they made a mistake online and someone's taking their money, or even something more benign, like they're on a site, they're on Facebook or something, for instance, or a social network of some kind, and a pop-up doesn't, is showing up where they didn't want it to show up, or now they're subscribed to a thing, and it may not be their fault, it may not be the side of the site, it's just this way. In any case, these kinds of interface tricks proliferate all over the web, as like I said, many of us are aware of. These are not just online things. These are not just UI dark patterns. These are things that exist everywhere, as I mentioned. Some of the other more common ones are misdirection, using sleight of hand to get people to, when you have a yes or a no button on a site, using a modal and having folks say yes when they mean to say no to the thing, because the language is used in a particular kind of way, trick questions, or using coercion, which we'll get into in a second. having a site email you to say, oh, we really miss you. These are not great. These are not great. These don't seem like benign things. Oh, I just want someone to keep using my site. I want someone to keep engaging with my product. But these behaviors have consequences. These actions have consequences. They create stress where stress would not otherwise exist necessarily, or arouse stress and make things worse than they have to be. If I get in a car accident and I just want to log into the app to get the insurance card because maybe I didn't print one, I always do, but say I didn't, I don't need 55 different screens asking me to buy car insurance at the time that I'm already a member of your site, for instance. Or sites that make usability heuristics and things like trying to convince people to subscribe to something for longer than they intended to, or subscribe to a thing that they're just reading for once, or asking me to vote, to tell me to rate a thing that I've been using for 2 minutes. These are all examples of these kinds of user hostile actions that we bake into the tools that we build. You can go online to darkpatterns.org. I'm not endorsing this site. I'm just telling you it's a site. There are other sites that have examples of this, but this is kind of the main repository for these kinds of user hostile examples. Because I could literally just do a whole deck where we just showed you these things. But the issue that you get into with this is that you're talking about sites that are, often in the private sector rather. We're not trying to call out one site or another. These are everywhere. They're all over the web. They're all in, whether tools we build and everything else, they're everywhere. We're all guilty of these things. Not all of these at once, but in different kinds of patterns. And so just learning what they are can educate you. Products are not innocent. I think that we often tend to think that when we build things with best intentions, even in the public sector. I worked in local government before this and in state government before I joined 18F, and it's easy to think, well, you have best intentions in mind, so we're going into this with open minds. These are our neighbors are building things for, and so we're not trying to hurt anybody or do anything wrong. So when we mess up, it's okay because we didn't mean to. But we have to understand that the decisions we make, the people we default, the audiences that we default versus others, the people we perceive to be our audience versus not without doing research or doing more research. Those are decisions that we're making. We're taking a stance. Our products, our websites take a stance. And so you have to understand that every time you're building something and to try to ensure that you're building for wider audiences, that you're considering the people that you're not thinking about. And there are ways to do that. And so this led me to amend my original premise, which years ago I wrote a deck, and the deck actually had in big words, every problem is a design problem. And the reality is more that every problem is a research problem. Even when you've done research, interrogating the research that you're doing, interrogating the framing of how you're doing the research leads to these kinds of decisions being made for better or worse, for ill or for nil. Victor Papanek wrote a book, it's called Design for the Real World in 1971. I believe it's out of print, but you definitely can find it online pretty easily. And this is a famous graphic in that book that I love sharing in every deck I do, where we talk about the designers share the problem versus the actual problem. Designers like myself, I tend to think that if we can design our way out of the solution, but the reality is the problem is much bigger and we're just a small part of that. And so the more we can understand the root of the problem, the actual problem we're trying to solve, and there are a multitude of problems, but the actual problem we're trying to solve in that particular use case is the more likely we are to be able to design a solution that works again for a broader array of audiences, for a particular targeted audience, or more importantly, for audiences that we're completely missing because we don't perceive them to be part of the audience of what we're building for. So what we're going to do here is we're going to talk a little bit about some terms. Sort of in lieu of, again, there's a lot of really good stuff online, visuals that you can see, whether you're using social networks to find sort of discrete examples of specific dark patterns. But where I think there are challenges in these conversations is we don't have really good nomenclature for things like closure experience or the different terms, because nobody owns individual parts of these experiences. They're built by teams. Maybe you have one product designer or UX designers or researchers, or in government, maybe none of these folks. You have a designer who just does everything. So because we don't have individual folks who own discrete parts of the experience, there's not one person whose only job it is to manage that screen I showed you on the train kiosk. If it was, it might look differently. It's probably designed by committee. But because of this, we don't have good language for these kinds of negative interactions that happen. Even things like calling them dark patterns, we just don't have good language for this. And so a lot of my work over the last couple of years with this topic, as I've gotten more into it and sort of diverted and done other things and brought it around, is to try to start delineating what these kinds of things are, what the friction is, spelling out the different challenges. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about some terms, and then we're going to get into a little bit of some ways we can sort of mitigate these challenges. And then after that, I'll be open to your questions. So designer myopia is a nearsightedness. It's regular myopia, right? It's the nearsightedness designing for our own experiences rather than solving actual problems. An architect actually was the one that brought me onto this whole thought. I gave a talk a bunch of years ago, and he pulled me aside later. He says, "Yeah, I went to architecture school and it's built for years, and I switched to this kind of design later." But he's telling me, they did a study years ago, and I'll have to find it, that says that you ask these architects, they build these buildings, and ask them afterwards, what was wrong. You walk them in to show them what was wrong, and then they would tell you, no, you're not. That's not wrong. You just don't understand what I was trying to do here. And this would happen universally with these different architects. And it's no different with things we build. The menu you put in a particular place. Well, no, the user just didn't do that right. That was supposed to be there for this reason. Well, maybe we should investigate why that is. This is just a tweet. You can read it. This is not an endorsement tweet. It's just a tweet. This is the sentiment of the tweet is what we're endorsing here. Attention theft are benign interactions meant to siphon time over siphon attention over small periods of time. Think of every time you're triggered to look at a notification, it's attention theft. And you can think, well, but people want notifications. They want to know when they need to log into, the tool to find out about a thing. But I found, even doing research, not just here, but other places, that some notifications are different than others. If it's a notification from my mother because she wants me to, help her with something because, the house is on fire or something terrible, that's a notification I probably need. Hopefully she wouldn't. We should just call. If it's something like, hey, just so you know, we've something more benign, maybe that's not as important. And being able to differentiate those interactions, those kinds of notifications. But having these interactions over time in one app, not a problem. On one website, maybe not a problem. If it's just one email newsletter, probably okay. But when you're getting these from every side, everyone's sending them all the time because that's the way we play the game, that's problematic. And if we're all doing these things, it adds up. The reason I started delineating friction and the different kinds of friction is because I get asked in these talks often, well, what's the difference between the friction that says it's good to have friction when I'm trying to log into my banking account so that no one can get in? So, you have to have, a password and maybe a secret code or some kind of two-factor authentication or like a thumbprint or something like that, versus the kind of friction that's just something that's just more abusive when I just want to do something that's not as important. So coercive friction is the kind of friction that's trying to make you to make counterintuitive decisions. Maybe this is less of a thing, on our kinds of sites, again, speaking from the government side, this is probably less of an issue on our side, but definitely more of an issue outside of this space where you're trying to coerce users or induce users to do things they wouldn't do. Oh, you want to cancel. What you really want to do is resubscribe for 6 months when you canceled your account for a month. No, I don't want to do that. That button was there and it may confuse me. Now I have to call to cancel it. That's problematic. Are you sure you want to do this? There's an article from Real Life Magazine that talks about the coercion involved, even in brands making you feel guilty about disabling or canceling something. It's not in this deck, but I talk a lot about closure experience, having more humane experiences around letting folks leave a tool. Everyone's not going to use your thing forever. At a certain point, we sunset from using a thing, and we should respect that experience and design better interactions around saying thanks for using this. Sorry, it wasn't right for you, or hey, you used it for a couple of years, you don't need it anymore. We don't have good language around that. We don't design those experiences very well. This is from I got a haircut. I don't live in this town anymore. It's nothing wrong. This barber was great, nice guy. I live 2,000 miles away. I can't get a haircut from him anymore. But the app that he used for me to schedule appointments sent me an email to tell me that he missed me. He does not know this language being used, for the record. Which is what offended me about it. I'm like, that isn't even a tone of voice that we use. It's different if I could, now we're getting into actual strategy, if I could customize that language as the designer, as the barber or whatever. That's different. It'd still be annoying, but at least it would sound like he and I talk. This doesn't do that. And it's being done in the name of the person who's, using this app and has no idea. He has no idea it's being sent. And for context, other barbers I know use the same tool and the same emails come to you. It says, I miss you. So there's clearly not a way for them, at least in this tool, to customize that. That's problematic. And doing it in the name of the user when the user doesn't know is really a problem. Guilt friction, there you go, an example of guilt friction. Using patterns to use guilt to retain a user rather than other kinds of strategies to maintain users, incentives, I don't know. I don't say it's word bribery, but whatever you need to do, but not guilt tripping people to use a tool. Ajit Iqbal wrote a book called Thinking as Services, which is very dense, but really I really enjoy because it takes sort of bridging this gap between strategy, interaction, and service design, and sort of making you think about it in a 50,000, maybe 100,000 foot view. But he talks about services as are agreements between people and arrangements between things. These are not just contracts in terms of written contracts, but every time a user agrees to use your thing or to go to your site to purchase a thing or acquire a thing or to work with you, it's an agreement that you're making, you're partnering, and there needs to be respect built in that on both sides. So when I talk about consequence design, what I'm talking about is not being actual designers of consequence, though I will say that we all are unwittingly. But until we start to think about the implications of the things that we're building, and so we start to think about how the impacts and study and measure the impacts. It's not just about NPS or whatever measurement tools or the analytics to try to figure out how to justify how to do more of what you're doing, but instead to figure out who are we missing, does this really work? And to ask your audiences these quite the hard questions to be able to then figure out how to build experiences that respect your audiences rather than just sell to them or proselytize to them or whatever else. So in terms of talking about the ways that we can mitigate some of these hostility built into tools, the first is using designated dissenter. It's a sprint exercise where a team member can imagine the ways a product can be abused. This is obviously earlier on in the product, but maybe you're already in flight and you're working on a new add-on or something to the thing you're building. Using a team member to do this and spreading this job around every sprint is super helpful because it gives everyone an opportunity to really get into it, and they really get into character with this, and it can be fun in a helpful way because you start, oh, I never thought about that, or man, are you sure that sounds really wild? Would someone really do that? Yeah, and here's why. Let me model this for you. This is a very version 0.5 tool called the Consequence Frame that I put together that starts and it's the beauty of this tool is that it allows you from a granular sort of one item on a thing or going far out to start thinking about things like, what is our belief about the thing we're adding to this tool? What is the ideal state? What are we trying to get to? Let's envision the end state and work backwards. What problems are we trying to solve for with the ideal state? How do we arrive at the goal of this ideal state again? Asking the question of who we talk to. Who are the folks that inform this decision? Were it just folks internally? Are they just stakeholders that we know closely? Do we talk to a lot of people, and who were they? And then more importantly, asking the question of like, who do we miss? And if you're asking this question often, and if you're doing this for different kinds of things, the idea is to start logging who we're missing in the hopes that perhaps you start to find a theme involved in that and are able to start to ask those questions of those folks more readily. I'm still iterating on this, but it's a sort of, I guess, a very, very early version. Friction auditing allows you to develop sort of entire whole research sprints around friction, deception, and mining for hostility where we don't anticipate it, and to log it, because often teams are very busy, have a lot of people, but by logging these things often, by tagging these issues and saying what it is, calling it for what it is. Hey, this is coercive friction. What's coercive friction? You're having the conversations. I tell folks who are individual contributors who don't work here, work other places. They're like, well, we have one developer of a small team and they're not interested in this. If you're flagging these things constantly, you have the power to do that. Eventually it starts conversations that may enable you to be able to make incremental changes to the things that you're building. Maybe it takes a lot longer this way, but the idea is to start highlighting this. And again, to bring these things up. We're not bringing them up right now, which is why these things continue to happen and why they proliferate the web, because big companies do it, small companies do it. Nonprofits do it. You see it in government. We're sort of all of us are doing similar things because it's a monoculture. So the more we can start to highlight these things, the better we can all be and help each other out, as opposed to being how it is now. Harm analysis allows us, it's sort of a speculative design thought process that allows us to start to assess where our myopia is. And it's sort of similar to the things I've already mentioned in terms of looking at, you know, what's the ideal state, who we think we're building for. My favorite are projects where you think your audience, and I'm just giving you, this is a random example, it's nothing to do with anything that's here, but there's an example of working on a thing where you think your audience is, say, 50% teenagers, because, you know, the app is built for kids who are in high school and college or something like this. And it turns out your biggest audience are folks in their 40s because, you know, somebody found it and it became a thing that folks were using to communicate with their sports leagues or something like that. Maybe you'll build different things for those audiences knowing that, but you wouldn't have known that from the outset because your target audience, so that the audience you had framed for was different. And the last thing are the 4 R's. Was one, to reconsider your own assumptions, reframe the problem statement with the lens of an edge case. I like to talk about edge cases. Edge cases are, there should be a slide in here. This is adapted deck as well. So there are longer versions of this talk that you can find on the internet if you Google my name, or I may tweet it out later. But in any case, edge cases are cases that are outside of your normal view of expected view of your use case. But I like to say edge cases are your actual audience. And so instead of thinking of the stressed person who has, you know, think of us in this economy or in Zoom world right now, we're all online and folks have kids at home, or you're doing school and you're also at work, and thinking about that as, you know, we may have thought of that as an edge case a year ago because a lot of folks didn't work at home. But now a lot of us are doing this. And so those are no longer edge cases. That's our reality. And so what does that look like when you're building for an audience that lives in a world that's different than the one before? Rewriting your protocols is needed to mine information about liminal UX states. Liminal UX, we're thinking about things like transition states inside of designs and, you know, interstitials and things like that. Again, nobody tends to own these experiences individually. It's not a person that manages this or a team that just manages those things. And so they tend to get lost or glossed over. And I think that the more we can focus on those intermediate steps, the better off we're going to be. So, and then we're going to repeat this process. Lastly, I'll just say to you that so many systems are designed assuming good intent. All of us have, you know, ostensibly good intentions, but in a world, you know, where a lot of things are going on, you know, it's sort of reality now is that it's service design, interaction design isn't built for crisis. And so what do we do next in a world that the things that we're using were built in a world that everything is pretty much working okay? How do we improve the things that we do to be responsive to the bevy of folks who live in the world that we all live in, as opposed to this ideal state of world that's in our offices, or we don't even be offices anymore, or from our Zoom cabins where we have these meetings, to design the tools that we're building. And so with that, I'll take any questions you have. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Ron. I've got at least a question to open things up with. So some of these kinds of patterns and some of these sort of outcomes, I don't know, maybe a way to think about some of the reasons they happen are like maybe like a perversion of like a results-driven method. Like you're measuring this one thing, and then you focus on it to the exclusion of other things, or you get to it through a kind of like collective like blind spot. Like you can't see this one aspect of something, so you're either designing around it or addressing it in a weird way. Do you have any thoughts around what you might call, like, I don't know, humane analytics or humane like KPIs or something, where like, what are some things that you might be measuring that might focus your attention on something that could counteract this?
That's fascinating. It's something I want to noodle on more. I definitely think we need more. I don't have a great answer for this, but I definitely think that as we think more about this topic, there need to be more analytical measures for like the things you're talking about. So these healthy KPIs, right? So that we're able to not just, you know, like mine for that data, but also then say that based on, you know, doing X positive thing, we were able to, these conversions happened and blah, 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 folks got less lost, so forth. I think maybe it's, in the current state, I think it's probably looking at things like trying to figure out where there's like real friction. Like, for instance, like this is really benign, but thinking of like onboarding into something and having a significant drop-off rate and folks who actually convert from like, starting the account to like dropping off because they get lost somewhere in that process, and figuring out like why that may be happening. Like that's super benign, but just, I think trying to figure out the ways that we can improve. I don't have a great answer for it yet, but it's definitely something that I'm thinking more about as I get into this, because I think that it's going to help make the case for this to be something that people should invest, organizations should invest in.
Yeah, I'd be excited to see how this topic and this sort of subject sort of matures. It seems like there's still a lot to think about here. From the chat, Janella asks, what resources do you recommend for continued learning on this topic?
So lots of books. Thinking of services is pretty dense,
Old school.
but there's I'm actually looking at my bookshelf right now. Actually, I'm just thinking of things out loud, but Good Services is a book you can look up. Good Services is a really good book. And it's way less dense than the one I just mentioned, Thinking of Services. Really any kind of, if you're talking about this topic specifically, obviously the site that I mentioned, and other sites that you can sort of Google around this topic as well. It depends on what lane you're trying to inhabit too. If you just want to think about the sort of UI and patterns piece of it, there's a lot of good stuff online that you can find pretty quickly if you're just looking at that topic to try to find resources around, because people are thinking about this now too. They're thinking about, in a way that they weren't several years ago. I think that where people are pretty aware now of the perils of hostile design, the dark patterns, and so forth. So if you're just trying to mitigate those things, I think a pretty quick search online beyond the dark pattern site that I mentioned would get you, and it would get you pretty deep into some wormholes around that topic. Some of the other more service design stuff that I'm talking about, that's probably a bit more I could go on for days about that. There are a lot of books right now, and not a lot, but a handful.
Do you ever find in your research that is addressing some of these hostile friction patterns that even when you're trying to address them head on, like it's hard to call them out, or you feel like sensitivity about calling them out, or like you can't actually, maybe folks have become so accustomed to it that they're not able to actually bring it up when you're doing sort of a usability test or any sort of one-on-one stuff?
I have found, because I've done this I've been doing this talks, and I go places and people talk to me sort of all over the world. And what I hear universally is, depending on where people work or the kind of work that they're doing, that happens, because I think that every organization has sort of their own sort of like framing around like what's acceptable and what isn't. And so there can be a reticence to call out things that, a thing that maybe we wouldn't do here. Again, we're working for the public, that we would not do, maybe is okay where they work, because it's about, again, going back to your question about metrics, right? Trying to drive users to the site or drive users to the app, and without regard for and with the argument that basically like everyone else is doing this, so what's the incentive for us to stop? And so that's where it comes back to trying to do some of the more, devising some of these slower, smaller, incremental things to try to get folks to be able to flag these things and start to sort of permeate the language of conversations and sprints and so forth in teams, is the other way to go, because it can be difficult, I think, for folks to truly highlight these things the way they would want to, maybe.
Sarah Bourne from the chat asks, is anyone else working on standard terminology in this area? Are you just on your own? How could we help with standardization or thinking through these problems?
I think the terminology piece, I mean, sure. I don't know that, I'm sure that there are people working on other aspects of this. I think in terms of, I'm inhabiting a very sort of narrow lane in terms of trying to sort of forge against sort of interaction, service, and sort of strategy, sort of in this sort of narrow lens of consequence. I think there are a lot of folks who are doing a lot of other things, but it tends to be broader around like more AI things or more strategy or very specific, very, very deep into interaction design. As far as standardizing language and so forth, yeah, I think anything folks can do to, I think probably highlighting the things that, I think finding it common use cases for problems, you know what I mean, are probably the kinds of things that we can start to do because, again, if this was longer in theory, we could have gone in and said, well, this is an example of this, or this is an example of that. But there are things I did not mention either because I don't have names for them yet. I hadn't even seen them before. And so I think using these conversations as a way for all of us to start seeding in our own brains things that we made things that seem like problems. Maybe they didn't seem like problems initially, but then turns out, oh, that seems a little weird. Flagging those things and having these kind of conversations so we can start to figure out what they are. We can all do that.
Do you think that we in government have any special challenges here or any special benefits as being more mission-driven organizations?
I mean, benefits, surely, again, like I said, most of this malicious stuff we're talking about aren't things we're going to do, right? Like, just for one, it wouldn't serve our aims. Like, it wouldn't help. Just come back to, you sure you want to leave GSA.gov? Like, it's not an endorsement. I mean, so like, a lot
we
of
have our own
would,
pop-ups that cause.
oh, we do. We definitely do. And we definitely do. I think the challenges are, so the things we're all aware of, right? Like we have really big audiences. We don't know who all of them are. We don't know where they're coming from or when. We have some sensibility of that, but not. And trying to, I've worked on some projects here where you're trying to narrow for one particular audience because they're the main core audience, but turns out there's lots of secondary audiences. They're also sort of have a lot of and they want totally different things. And so trying to figure out how to sort of do that. I think the easy things are we can be sort of influenced by sort of the larger world of stuff that's going on, right? And sort of the broader design world and sort of getting swept up in that and trying to figure out how to synchronize our user needs with maybe they're more unique than, and you're doing, obviously the USWDS is great for helping with, that, but it's all the sites that maybe don't use that yet and try to figure out how to synchronize those things and to make this important too, right? It's hard when we don't have there aren't a million of us doing this work across the board. A lot of folks who are trying their best, and that can be hard to make these conversations, amplify these conversations.
For sure. One of the things we're trying to do here, at least in a small way.
Absolutely.
And then I think we have time for one more question. Claire asks from the chat, how do you manage stakeholders who work within government, but maybe not digital, who want certain features for their purposes that don't serve the user and may be coercive? How do you make the case for?
Yeah, that's interesting. So this is it's definitely one of my local government tactics rather than a federal government tactic. I'd say that educating those users on especially if they're not digital, educating them on why those things aren't good. Whether that's in a more explicit way or whether it's through, through education or however else you want to do it to help them understand why those things don't work. Don't serve the aims of what you're trying to do. And you can use metrics for that. You can use data for that. You can use best practice for that. That's where I think us being experts, you're able to bring those conversations to fore because people do have their own desires and needs and wants. And if there's a world where it's something you can synchronize a way to give people a little bit of what they want to make their jobs easier while removing the corrosive parts of it, that's what I've tried to do before. But I think it's just assessing the need and being able to help them understand that, the whys and the whats.
Awesome. Thanks for being here today, Ron. It's nice to listen to what you have to say and really sort of eye-opening to think about some of these perspectives that, perhaps just because of their very nature come out of blind spots. So it's nice to get that perspective. I'm going to jump in. I'm going to share my screen for one last slide to talk about just how to keep in touch with the design system. But thank you again. And here we go. There we go. So that's it. Thanks again to Ron Bronson for joining us today and for talking about consequences and dark patterns and all the things that we may or may not be seeing when we design for sites or services. So next month, I'm hoping to get a little redesign roundtable together of teams that have recently gone through designs or redesigns to talk about their process and what they've done and how they've use the design system for good or for anything that they found while using the design system. Hope to do that next month. And as always, I encourage you to join our community in USWDS public Slack. So you can follow our progress and get answers, contribute to the discussion there. And look at us on GitHub and see what we're doing at our website as well. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for taking the time to keep in touch with the design system. I appreciate it. Take care.